Patriots, sit down and buckle up, because what I'm about to break down will shake you to your core. For decades now, we've watched as radical environmental policies have crippled our land, devastated our economy, and endangered American lives. And now, finally, there's a spark of hope, a long overdue change that could bring us back to sanity. I'm talking about the 2001 Roadless Rule. Sound familiar? Probably not, because the mainstream media won't talk about it. But it's one of the most damaging federal land policies in our nation's history. One that locked up nearly 60 million acres of national forest land from being responsibly managed. That's right, no roads, no timber harvesting, no wildfire mitigation, just trees rotting, fires raging, and small towns choking on the smoke, while bureaucrats in D.C. sip their lattes and pretend to save the environment from behind a desk.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. Chief Schultz, I was thrilled by the announcement made by Secretary Rollins about the rescission of the 2001 Roadless Rule. The Roadless Rule prohibits, as the name implies, road construction, and it also prohibits effectively timber harvesting on nearly 59 million acres of National Forest System lands, including 60% of the Forest Service land in Utah. By the way, that 59 million acres represents nearly 10% of the total federal land footprint. This is a significant amount of land. Now, while the intent of the original Roadless Rule may well have been to preserve the environment, in practical effect, in many ways, it's done the opposite of that. The practical effect of it has been environmental disaster. It's been devastating to forest health and to wildfire mitigation efforts. It's also added to the demise of our domestic timber industry. Last year, I asked your predecessor, a person who held this job in the previous administration, if the Roadless Rule had helped or hindered wildfire mitigation efforts. And he said, quote, "I don't think it was designed to help wildfire mitigation." Certainly a true statement, and vastly understated in my opinion. Now, would you say that the Roadless Rule has helped or hindered wildfire mitigation efforts over the last 2 decades?
Senator Lee, I would say the Roadless Rule, and what we see in terms of the data sets, there's about 24.5 million acres of roadless areas that are within the wildland-urban interface or within 1 mile of the wildland-urban interface. So by not being able to have areas that we can go into and manage or be able to put the fires out, that is a problem. So it doesn't help for sure, and it definitely hinders. And what you'll find out too is that many roadless areas are in fact roaded. So sometimes it's a misnomer. I was in Montana last week on the Helena, Lewis, and Clark Forest. There's a lot of roaded, roadless, same thing on the Lolo Forest. So to suggest that roadless areas are truly always roadless, that is not the case. In many cases, historically, we're roaded.
No, I get that, but that's not the point. The point is just whether it's helped or hindered.
It's not helped.
Good. Now, so what does the rescission of the Roadless Rule mean then for land management, for timber harvesting, and for wildfire mitigation on Forest Service land going forward? What does that look like?
Chairman, so the rescission, what that will look like is we will begin this fall, we will have a rulemaking process that we will go through that process to repeal the rule officially. There are 2 states that we will not be repealing the rule. That's Idaho and Colorado that have their own unique roadless rules, so those rules will not be impacted. But we will repeal the rule through a rulemaking process. We'll have public input in that process. And then ultimately we would have to amend forest plans to adopt that strategy in those forest plans. But that's what we started this fall.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to discuss briefly the revisions to the Manti-LaSalle National Forest Management Plan. The 2023 draft of that plan included 122,780 acres of recommended wilderness areas. Now, to be perfectly clear, these areas do not meet the Forest Service's own standards for wilderness or for recommended wilderness. The recommendations also appear to conflict with the Utah Wilderness Act of 1984, which designated wilderness areas in exchange for the assurance of no future Utah wilderness designations. That agreement was seemingly ignored by the Biden administration. Will you commit to working with the state and with local cooperating agencies to reevaluate and remove these recommended wilderness areas before the final land management plan is complete?
So, sir, yes, we have received those comments from the state. They're being reviewed right now. We will definitely be working with the state in that review of that process and reconsidering those recommendations in the draft.
Thank you, and I hope you'll reach out to me as you do that in any way I can be helpful. I'd love to be kept apprised of that. Now, timber harvesting is a critical component of responsible forest management. It helps maintain healthy forest density, removes hazardous fuels by preventing fuel buildup for the fires, and supports rural economies across the country. And since 2000, just in the last 25 years alone, the average annual harvest from forest system lands has been just 2.3 billion board feet, far below both historic averages and allowable quantities. Now, just last week, we took a huge step in the right direction by enacting new timber harvesting provisions in the big, beautiful bill passed by Congress and signed into law by President Trump to help restore our forests and revitalize the domestic timber industry. What do you see as the biggest remaining barriers to increasing timber production on federal lands, now that this bill has been passed? And how do we cut through red tape and provide a degree of certainty for our timber and our sawmill industries?
Mr. Chairman, I think you hit a lot of the good points. The biggest thing that the sawmills are looking for is certainty and predictability, right? So the biggest thing is the Forest Service needs to do what they say they're going to do. So when you talk about, our sustainable supply and what we're doing, if we deliver what we're saying we're going to do, that's what the industry is looking for. In terms of barriers that are out there, we know litigations are barriers. But in terms of funding things, we're looking at other ways. You'd mentioned the long-term contracts that are identified in the reconciliation bill. That's something we will be looking at. We actually just signed an agreement with the state of Montana just last week to do a 20-year agreement where the state would come in and assist in managing federal lands. And that's something that we actually have some initial discussions with Utah to look at that, and other states in the West as well. So we see that being an opportunity where the states can kind of step in and help us in managing those resources on a go-forward basis. So that's it. I mean, we're looking at other mechanisms for contracting. We're looking at working with partners on a go-forward basis. Litigation is something, and I know there are provisions and other statutes and laws you all are looking at right now to help with some of that. We've talked about the Cottonwood decision many times, but that is one that is out there that still creates some hurdles for us, the litigation piece.
Thank you.
And here's the kicker. 60% of Forest Service land in Utah was trapped under this rule. That's 10% of all federal land nationwide. And what do we have to show for it? Wildfires that burn hotter and longer, a timber industry brought to its knees, and rural families who've been abandoned. But hold on, because there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Secretary Rollins just announced the Biden administration is rescinding the Roadless Rule. Finally, after 20 years of destruction, they're taking the first step to undo the damage. I know what you're thinking. Did the Biden administration really do something right? Well, don't thank them just yet. It's not done, and we need to keep their feet to the fire to make sure this actually happens. Chief Schultz, the current Forest Service boss, just confirmed what we've known all along. This rule hindered wildfire prevention. There are 24.5 million acres of so-called roadless land near towns and homes that can't be managed properly. And get this, many of these so-called roadless areas actually have roads. It's a lie built on outdated maps and green propaganda. So why do they do it? Why keep these lands locked up? Because it fits the narrative. Because extremist environmental groups fund lawsuits and fight every attempt to thin the forests, build access roads, or harvest timber. And let's not forget the economic side. Since 2000, we've harvested only 2.3 billion board feet of timber per year on federal lands, way below what we could and should be producing. Sawmills are closing. Loggers are out of work. Our timber industry is suffocating under regulations, lawsuits, and D.C. red tape. But thanks to a bill signed by President Trump, new timber harvesting provisions are coming online. These aren't handouts. These are lifelines for rural communities, for job creators, and for the American economy. But let me be clear. There are still hurdles. Environmental lawsuits, the Cottonwood decision, Endless bureaucratic review processes. It's a mess. The Forest Service needs certainty, long-term contracts, and local partnerships, especially with states like Montana and Utah stepping up to help manage federal lands. That's the model for success. This isn't about clear-cutting forests or paving paradise. This is about balance, about stewardship, about protecting lives, property, and freedom. The environmental left has failed us miserably, and it's time to get back to common-sense land management that puts Americans first. Patriots, this fight is far from over. If we want real reform, we need to stay loud. We need to demand results, not just announcements. And we need to support leaders who believe in America's land, America's jobs, and America's future. If you stand with our forests, our loggers, and our freedom, then smash that like button, subscribe, and share this message with every true American you know. Because the mainstream media won't tell this story, but we will. This is the America. First movement in action. This is what real conservation looks like. And this is just the beginning.